1615 second webinar of 2013. I'm Matthew Ellison, the president of 1615 Church Missions Coaching, and I'm glad to be with you today. Today's topic is, do local churches really need mission agencies? For a very long time, many local churches have abdicated their God-given role in world missions to mission agencies. They have supported world missions by providing people and finances, but often they have not assumed their special role as central participants in God's global enterprise. Today, there is a growing wave of churches who are moving from a support role to an active role. They are moving away from simply responding to funding requests to becoming more strategically driven. So is there still a role for mission agencies, or can local churches do it on their own? Do local churches still need mission agencies? This is the question we aim to address in today's webinar. We trust that this webinar will be helpful to you, your church, or your organization. Today's subject matter experts are Dave Hansen and Scott Harris from Avant Ministries and Mike Potter from the Foothills Fellowship. Dave Hansen is the Vice President of Ministry Relations at Avant, and Scott Harris is the Vice President of Field Ministries. The mission of Avant is to glorify God by helping others enjoy His presence through planting and developing new churches in the unreached areas of the world. And Mike Potter is the Senior Pastor at the Foothills Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he has a unique journey to share. In just a moment, I will hand the microphone over to our presenters, but first, a couple of details. Number one, your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. You can listen through your computer speakers, or you can call in on the telephone on the number listed in the GoToWebinar task panel. As questions come to mind today, please type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We will be addressing questions for the last 15 minutes of our time together. Over 48 people registered for today's live webinar. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org in the next few weeks. Thank you, Dave, Scott, and Mike, for sharing with us today. Now let's begin the webinar.
This is Scott, and I'm going to briefly touch on some scripture today to help give context to the way Avant views the church agency question. First, we're going to look at the example of Paul from Acts. I think we all understand that the human side of what we call missions began with the church in Antioch in Acts 13. So there's really no question of the church's role as a base for mission. That history continues today with churches both sending directly and using agencies. But do we find justification for agencies in Scripture? A question I've wrestled with a good bit, and I see in Paul's growing band of co-missionaries that it mimics some of what agencies do today, enough so that it's not at all a stretch to call his ministry an early model of a mission agency. A couple of things in that area. His group included various people from various churches. We see John Mark in Acts 13:13, Silas from Jerusalem in Acts 15:40, Timothy from Derbe in 16:1-3, and many others as we look through Acts and the epistles. He was also a mission administrator in a sort of player-coach sense, in that we see him providing direction to deployed personnel. In Acts 17:15, we see how he instructed Silas and Timothy to come to Athens. In Acts 18:19, he left Priscilla and Aquila in Ephesus. And there are numerous other passages that we won't touch on today. With that background, where we see clearly the church, and I think clearly enough mission in the New Testament, let's talk about the either-or question a little bit. My own experience as a pastor, a missionary, and a mission administrator, I'm convinced it really isn't a question of whether church or agency is God's instrument to accomplish His mission, rather one of how they can work together. A quick look at another section of Scripture helps reinforce that view. In Philippians 1:5, and then as it's expanded in chapter 2, verse 25, we see that the Philippian church seems to provide a loose model for us. And in terms of Philippians 1:5, partnership in the gospel would be that model. It describes the Philippian church as partners with the Pauline Missionary Agency, if we can take it that way. It was a mission band that originated in a local church but became much more diverse as it added co-workers along the way. Realizing that Scripture easily allows both church and agency a place in mission and that God is the owner, it seems to make sense to work together. Talk a little bit about the strengths of each that they bring to partnership. The church clearly knows its people best. As mission agencies recruit from diverse sources, we have the interview process, the recruitment process to get to know people, but local churches know their people. They're with them in community week after week, day after day. Also, churches have an advantage and a strength in the fact that they have a clear sense of the places and the people groups God's leading to them to focus their Great Commission efforts on. The church can provide missionary support and care that builds from pre-existing community. Because they know their people so well, they grow out of the community in the local church and just extend that to people they send to the field in ways that agencies really can't do, especially in the early stages. And I think churches also add very often a high level of passion for the mission. The agency, on the other hand, brings its strengths as well. They may be more in the technical area. Agencies usually have well-developed training. Many agencies have the benefit of decades or more of experience in church planning. And then agencies also tend to have very solid infrastructures for supporting ministry. And that's probably more multifaceted than many would expect. So things as simple as moving finances around the world, things as profound in the life of a team as providing coaching, on-field training, support for leaders, things like experience in handling health, political, and other contingency situations, the ability and the personnel to provide local accountability day by day, a seasoned understanding of field-based member care needs, and also research resources that are augmented by local and regional network contacts. At Avant, we believe that each, the church and the agency, should have a voice at the table. Some of the practical benefits we see from partnering in ministry are that we reduce the duplication of activities, we provide better logistic and strategic support for those on the field, we can reduce preventable attrition, and we provide an amazingly wonderful kingdom cooperation model for churches that grow out of the ministry. At Avant, our intent is to work together with the church in whatever ways and in whatever circumstances we can. We are always seeking to jointly leverage our respective strengths to develop worshipers and churches in needy places. We do that through things from traditional sending arrangements to joint ventures to helping churches with training and consulting. We openly share what God's entrusted to us because we are focused on His mission. Dave?
Thanks, Scott. Just a little bit of background to help you understand where I'm coming from on this particular subject. After 11 years on the field as a missionary, I returned to Lincoln, Nebraska, and became part of a church of about 250 people at that time. Over the next 23 years, that church grew from 250 to almost 6,000 people. I also had the privilege of chairing that missions committee for at least 17 years until they finally hired a missions pastor. That role of chairing the committee was in a lay position. Here I am now after 5 years at Avant with a certain part of my job focused on church-based teams. I wonder how many pastors, at least I found myself even asking that same question, or mission leaders have said this about mission agencies. Why didn't you ask me? I could understand the gap that existed between the agency and the local church for those many years. I lived it out. If they didn't actually say it, I can assure you that many pastors and mission leaders have thought it. To them, it seemed like all the agency wanted was, well, give us our people and send us your money. So you can quickly realize why the local church might think that they don't need agencies. After all, many agencies acted like they don't need the local church. In talking to a senior pastor of a large church here in Kansas City, he stated this: churches don't understand mission agencies and what they do, and agencies don't understand what the churches want. Now that sure doesn't show much of a partnership, and definitely has confirmed a lack of good communication. With this in mind, you can see that between the church and agencies, there definitely has been a gap. And we could just keep going as it is, or we could choose to work at making it better. At least my experience has been, and I think it's really safe to say, that there are many agencies, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, that have added people to bring a true focus to a relationship between the local church and the agency. And with this background, no wonder this posed the question, the one that we're dealing with today: do churches really even need mission agencies? I'd like you to hear from a pastor who inherited a church or inherited a program that was already in place when he took the role as senior pastor. Mike Potter is going to tell us his story of a church that tried to do it alone. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and glad to be part of this conversation. And it is true, I inherited a church that had, right before I arrived, sent a couple to North Africa on their own to do ministry in a very difficult environment. Before I tell that story, let me back it up just a little bit and say that this church that I'm a part of, I'm the senior pastor of the church now. I was the youth pastor before that, so I've been a part of this church for about 13 years with a gap in between where I was away for a couple of years. But this church has a history of doing missions in very difficult places. Our mission strategy has been to the unreached people in the 1040 window, which is a latitude, longitude designation, but it's in the toughest areas of the world. Mostly Muslim context. And so in the mid-1990s as a church, and we're a small church, we're a church of about 200 to 250 people, we decided as a church that we would adopt an unreached people group in South Asia. And this was in the 1990s. And so what that meant is we would begin to specifically pray, we would send resources, and we would also raise up people to go. And so we did that. And in the mid-1990s, we sent a couple from our church to go to South Asia. And we joined them with Wycliffe Bible translators. So with this story, this first story, we actually did use a sending organization, a mission organization. We coupled with them, and they went. We saw some unbelievable things happen in the 90s and the early 2000s with this people group that we had adopted in South Asia. And we sent, of course, this couple. We also sent some short-term people from our fellowship to go as well. We joined up with other people in that area doing ministry among this tribe that we had adopted, and we saw great success. After about a few years of our involvement, we saw 2 brothers come to Jesus among this people group of about 2.5 million people. And from there, we have seen an explosion. These 2 brothers led their families to Christ, and then we've seen an explosion where we see about 1,000 home churches that have grown out of these two brothers across the whole region. And so we were thrilled with that. Our little church being able to be a part of something this big was unbelievable to us. In 2001, this couple had to come home because of what happened on 9/11, and where they were living was in a hotbed of that related to that issue. And so our involvement, though, continues with another one of the people that were on the ground at that time, and we continue to have influence in that region. But we decided in the early 2000s that we would try it again. And so we began to pray and ask God to reveal to us yet another people group that we could adopt and begin to pray for it, begin to send resources, and, Lord willing, send people. And so we decided upon, after much prayer and research, to adopt a group of people that we, as a code name, call the Bean people, B-E-A-N, as in coffee bean. It's a group of nomadic people, about 3 million people in this tribe. It's a marginalized tribe, and they are coffee growers in North Africa. And so we adopted this group in 2005, and in our foyer in our church we have displayed the covenant of adoption that we signed as a church in 2005. And in 2006, we sent another couple. This is a different couple than the one that we sent to South Asia, but we sent this couple, a young couple that had for years and years wanted to go to North Africa. They were a part of our fellowship, and so we sent them. But we did it differently this time, and I think it's because of what Dave talked about prior to me talking, and that was that we didn't understand necessarily how a mission agency could help us, and I couldn't find, not me, we couldn't find. I was not actually the senior pastor at the time that we sent this couple, but we as a church could not find a mission organization that would work alongside of us. Of course, this is about 10 years ago, and Dave has said in the last 5 to 10 years we're seeing a complete shift in this. But for whatever reason, we decided that we would send this couple to North Africa on our own. So here we are, a small church, and we are carrying the load of preparing this couple for the field, of administering their time there, of coaching them. We are doing it all. And so they were sent while I was gone. In the interim between me being the youth pastor, being gone for a couple of years, going back to my home church in the Midwest to do ministry there, and then being called back. In that interim time, they were sent. And shortly after they were sent by our pastor and by our church, the pastor decided to leave, which then threw everything into, chaos. At that point, I was called saying, would you come back and serve as our senior pastor? And I knew what I was getting myself into. Not only was I going to pastor this church, but I was also going to be in charge of this mission organization that we had formed on our own, and in charge of this couple and their 2 young boys who we had sent to North Africa. And so I did come back, and it was then that I inherited this situation. I talk about this situation being one that we bit off more than we could handle. For whatever reason, we sent them on our own. And now I have, for the last 6.5 years, been kind of carrying the load, along with our elders, of the decision that we made. So the question today is, do local churches really need mission agencies? And I would say with a resounding yes. We do need mission organizations, because the last 6.5 years have been difficult for us. It's hard for us to administer this project, this couple. We have a hard time getting money to them because the country that they are in, there are restrictions, and so we don't have the ways and the means to get money to them, and so that has been difficult. We've had a hard time really staying in good connection with our missionaries that are there. We don't necessarily know what they're doing, what we need to do as far as coaching them and caring for them. And it was just only but a month ago that I was finally, along with my wife, able to go to this country to visit them and to see what they are doing. Before then, we were able to send one short-term worker for a year to go alongside of them, and she was able to return and give us a report, but those of us in leadership were not able to ever be on the ground and to see what was going on. The closest I was able to get was a couple of years ago. I was able to go to a neighboring country that is more open and meet them there, but I was not able to go to their country. Again, I finally was this last month, but it has been very, very difficult. This country presents challenges. This people group that we adopted presents challenges, and we have really had to rely upon this couple that we sent to kind of navigate the waters on their own. There are other missionaries there in this country that they have kind of teamed up with, but they've not really been able to receive any of the kind of care that these other couples and other families have. So we did bite off too big of a chunk, in my opinion. We do need mission organizations to help us. And so from all of this, and I may be skipping over things, and you may have questions, and I understand that I'm trying to throw this huge experience into a couple of minutes' time, but a couple of things that I've learned. One is that a small church can make a huge difference in the efforts of the kingdom around the globe, and we've seen that. And so we are so happy to have been used and to continue to be used by the Lord to do some pretty phenomenal kingdom work in some pretty dark places around the world. But second of all, one thing that I have learned through all of this is that we can't do it on our own. We need help. And so one of the things that we are doing, and one of the reasons for my visit to this country in North Africa just a month ago, was to talk face-to-face with our people on the ground, this family, and to let them know that, number one, we love them, we care for them, and we do whatever we can, and we will do whatever we can to continue to support them. But number two, we have to, in many ways, push the reset buttons and bring an organization, or maybe multiple organizations, alongside of us and them as we move forward. We just don't feel like we as a local church can sustain this any longer. And they agree, this couple does agree, but there is a lot of uncertainty. They've been there for 7 years, and now to try to find an organization that will come alongside of us will be difficult. And then what will this dynamic look like? What will this relationship look like? What will our role be? What will their role be? There are a lot of questions. And so we learned the hard way that you do need mission organizations, but that the local church plays a valuable role as well. And so we're trying to look for that perfect relationship where the church and the agency can exist together in a pre-existing situation.
Mike, thank you for those insights, and I'm sure there'll be some questions for you at the end. Dave?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm sure there will be some good questions out of that, and let me thank your church for growing missionaries. You know, I've worked with churches that have, 12,000 people, and no one's going out of that body of believers as a missionary. So while it has been a challenge, it's great to at least hear of two couples coming out of a relatively small body of believers who have a passion for world missions. So obviously your church has a DNA that does at least focus on world missions and is instilling a passion for missions in the hearts of the people in the church. I'm sure that you found yourself struggling. Okay, I got to be this senior pastor and prepare for preaching every week and everything else, and then I have this couple in another part of the world. So that will generate, I'm sure, some good questions and some good dialogue in just a few minutes. Let me shift just a little bit and tell you about the story of another church. And actually, in a few minutes, you'll also see the website for this church to where you can go and watch a video of the story of this church. My focus primarily, though, is going to be about the agency and in this case, actually even 1615, how these pieces come together in order to accomplish getting a team to the field. The church I'm talking about is from Rock Point. It's based out of Detroit, and the story for them kind of goes like this. There was an executive pastor who had been at this church for approximately 17 years. His last name was Camiso, and that would give you a clue that he probably was Italian. Well, he is Italian. So the Lord had been kind of working in his heart and in the heart of his wife as well of should they explore and think about going as missionaries. Well, with a name like Camiso, what do you think they would start thinking about is, well, they have family back in Italy, and should they, maybe, just maybe, should they go back to Italy as missionaries? As a result of that kind of just a little passion or interest, they got on the web and started looking for mission agencies working in Italy. And in the case of Avant, we actually have been in Italy for a long time. So they discovered that Avant actually had teams in Italy and were planting churches in Italy. As a result of that, Rick became in contact with Avant, and we continued that dialogue to the point to where eventually the discussion surfaced, well, how about a church-based team? That's where all members of the team, and as you see on the slide, the team ended up being 3 families from the same church built the team. One of the team members actually was also on staff, and she was over the children's ministry. Well, to kind of speed that forward and show you the connectedness here, basically 1615 comes in at the church level and spends quite a bit of time over a period of almost a year of coaching that church, of understanding the cost, understanding the health of the church, understanding how big of a passion is it. Is the leadership of the church ready to do this? Is the church ready to take on this sacrifice in order to do this? All these things that are very, very important, maybe more on the local church side than they are on the team side that's actually going to lead. But you'll see a little bit later, I'm going to tell you the story of where that coaching did not take place and it created another problem. Well, in this case, then, a team is selected, and it's really primarily selected by the local church. As Scott already said, really, I mean, in this case, 2 of these people were on staff, and the third family was from within that body, so they knew those people better than probably Avant would after every assessment that you could possibly give them or every interview that you could even throw at them. They knew really the spiritual life of these people. They knew how well they would mesh together and all those kinds of things. So the church really kind of brought this team together, and then the church also really selected where the team would go. Avant sure facilitated some travels to a couple of countries to explore where the team might go, and eventually they landed on going to Senegal. So the team, though, comes to Avant and does candidate orientation just like any other recruit that Avant might have. So then they continue on that process, and in this case, the church even did the faith promise and asked for commitments and reached an ability to take on 50% of their support. We then bring the team back to Avant for a couple weeks of team training. And again, it was a little bit easier with this team than other teams because they knew each other well, but we still provided that training, which Scott was making comment about, and even Mike made reference to the necessity for training people. So then the next step was the agency got involved in helping this team go to Albertville, and that's where they studied the French language. We then recruited a kind of a nanny to join the team for those 6-7 months that they were in Albertville, which then allowed the wives really to go full-time language school. So there again you can see the church and the agency coming together in order to accomplish that. Well, the team then leaves Albertville and moves to Senegal, and there they are, of course, and we have a regional director in Africa, so he's able to also immediately provide them hands-on relationship, counsel them, help them on that journey. So all that, you can see that there has been a lot of back and forth between the local church and Avant, and in this case, even 1615, spending almost a year. The beautiful thing about this whole picture, and I do hope that you can go to the Avant website, avantministries.org/churches, and watch the entire video. Because here you had a church that was struggling financially, didn't even know if it was going to be able to keep its staff. It was in financial difficulty, and they, as a result of following the Lord's leading, are now supporting this team by $12,000 a month. They virtually had no missions program, and today they are giving $12,000 a month to this team, are better off financially than they have been for years. And that isn't the end of the story. What was it? Last month they just bought, every team member, they bought 3 vehicles for those team members, raised all that money out of the body. So every Sunday they light a candle at the front of the church as a reminder that they have an extension in another part of the world. So there you go. Watch the video. You'll enjoy seeing what God has done as Avant and the Rock Point Church have come together in order to try to plant a church in Senegal. I had hoped to have also on with us today Pastor Drew from Liberty, Missouri, a church here on the edge of Kansas City, but unfortunately he can't be here. But I asked Drew this question: why not just do a church-based team alone? Why would you use a mission agency? And he answered that question with this, and it is a powerful, powerful quote, and I will read it to you because it is so loaded with great information. Drew writes, "In theory, churches do not need mission agencies. I think the church at Antioch did just fine sending and supporting the pioneers of all pioneer ministry efforts. God has empowered the church with His Holy Spirit and the resources necessary to fulfill the Great Commission. In reality, however, most churches in this century need mission agencies because most of us have marginalized the Great Commission, or at least have refused to globalize our disciple-making efforts. And we have abdicated our responsibility to mobilize, train, send, and support missionaries for so long. We desperately need mission agencies to teach us how to effectively get in the game of world evangelism and come alongside it as we develop and execute our game plan. We need each other as teammates. I pray that agencies would acknowledge this as well and would take the time to nurture us along until we are ready to take the ball and run with it. In reality, there will always be churches who need agencies to guide and counsel them in their missions effort. Personally, I consider agencies to be vital family members of mine as I lead the missions efforts at our church. The type of family members that one actually likes. Not only do I enjoy their company and delight in sharing the load with them, I sincerely need them to point out blind spots of mine and bring the best out of me and my church. May we all strive for utmost unity and urgent commitment to excellence in finishing the mission that our commanding officer has given us, so that the King Jesus may receive uttermost glory when He is worshipped by those from every tribe and tongue." Drew Matthews, Associate Pastor, Liberty Christian Fellowship. That's loaded. There are two of those things that jump out at me. Teammates, wow, that's a powerful word for an agency and a church to use. And secondly, I chuckled a little when he said family members that one actually likes. I guess that means agencies and churches can get along. The flip side of this whole discussion is the story of a church that we had worked with for a number of years, and they actually had recruited their team, and the team was about ready to go out the door when the missions pastor resigned from that position. Most of our relationship with that church was with that missions pastor. He came to our campus once, maybe twice. We were out there, and we had a good relationship. But when he walked out that door, the passion for that team also kind of left with him, and it meant that there was a scramble. So now what are we going to do? Some of the church leadership did not even realize what it meant to have recruited and the sending of a church-based team. Fortunately, and here is where the agency relationship was crucial. Avant was able to step in again, help the leadership, keep that passion going, and 2/3, I guess, of that team are now on the field. So let me close. I might surprise you when I say a church doesn't need to use an agency if it can select the right people, train the missionary to be, help them raise support, provide member care, including missionary kid care and education, field leadership, health insurance, education plans, crisis management, personal visits to the field, accountable progress, and even maybe handle re-entry issues if the missionary comes home. If you can do all those things, you do not need a mission agency. If an agency doesn't bring something to the table, then you should go right ahead and do it without the agency. But I believe that there are many good agencies, not just Avant, who can bring things to the table that can assist the local church. After all, it's not who is sending the missionary that's the most important issue. The issue is that the unreached need to be reached. So as we go clear back to the very beginning, what Scott was talking about, yes, we must do this together, and it's not about Avant or about the local church. It is accomplishing the task of reaching the unreached with the gospel. Back to you, Matthew.
Well, thank you, all of you, for your insights. I want to open it up for some questions at this point. And again, the question and answer panel is on the right side of the GoToWebinar screen. And if you just place your question in the question section, I will field it to the right person. We don't have any questions logged yet. Give a couple of seconds here for you. There's 24 people online still, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask Mike, Dave, or Scott, or even myself.
Hey, Matt, can I jump in? This is Mike.
Please, Mike.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, Dave, what you said, that you don't need a mission agency if you can, and then you made this long list. I'm actually looking forward to copying down that list and taking it to not only my church leadership who are on board that we need an agency to come alongside of us, but also to my workers who are on the field who are struggling with the idea of, you know, what will it look like and what does it mean for us if we bring an agency in, to just use those bullet points and say, have we done a good job in doing these things? And the answer will be, to some, yes, maybe even better than an agency could do, but when you look at the whole list, the answer will be no. We just can't, as a local church, pull off all the things that need to be done in order to provide the before care, during care, and after care of our missionaries. We can't do it. And so I thought that was a real valuable list, and I look forward to getting that bullet point list over to my leaders and my missionaries.
That's good. I've got a question here. This is from Randy. How do we best assess potential mission agency partners? How do we best assess potential mission agency partners?
Well, you know, working with churches, I think the first question straight out of the gate is, how does the agency see the church and the role of the church? Does it come across as if we know everything and we have an inside track to God's will for the church's life? Or is the agency really, really open to what I'll call a true partnership? Are we, like Drew said, are we really willing to be teammates or not? Or are we playing two different games and you're just providing us with the players, so to speak? So I think that's really where the local church would need to start. And I don't know that you can pick up a document and get an answer to that question. I think, and I applaud, pastors or missions leaders going and actually visiting agencies. We had a missions pastor here on campus a couple months ago now, and he was kind of making the rounds and visiting the agencies where, in this case, they had missionaries with Avant for a number of years, but they had never visited Avant. They really didn't know the leadership at Avant. And when I think of my time in Lincoln of chairing the missions committee of that church, I don't remember hardly ever a mission agency personnel or leadership particularly coming and visiting. So I think it is very much a dialogue between the pastor and the agency leadership. And if they don't come across as an agency that really honors the church and sees them as an equal player in this discussion, then I would probably say run.
Yeah, I was going to mention, if I can just key off something Dave said, I think when you're assessing an agency's, willingness to work with the local church, are they providing opportunities that transcend funding? Dave has said a couple of times, do they allow the local church a seat at the table? Do they view the local church as a viable partner? So I think how they, their view of the local church is obviously key. And then having, a common vision and common values, those are things we talk about a lot, but they really are critical. Are the philosophies alike enough where there could be a marriage? Now, they're not going to be exactly the same, but did you share common values? Do you have common vision? I think those are important pieces. And I really like what you said, Dave, that there is a time of getting to know. When 1615 coaches a church and they don't already have an agency connection, one of the things we do is we look for the best fit. In light of who your church is, in light of how you're gifted, in light of your passions and values, which is the right agency for you? So part of that is that exploratory time of looking for the right match, the right marriage, if you will. I think that's actually a good metaphor. Let me move on to another question here. This is a good one. This comes from Jacob. He says, what were some of the factors that you believe contributed to Rock Point going from struggling financially to funding the team so well and moving forward as a church? So this church is in financial distress, and wow, things really turn pretty quickly, in fact, and they not only fully fund the team, but the church stabilizes financially. Dave, any comments on that?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is God incredibly blessed their willingness to follow a passion that he was laying on their hearts. I think the senior pastor, even in the video, makes reference. A lot of the turnaround came about because everybody in that church, every member of that church, has ownership of where this church has sent this church-based team. It is not something that is just owned by, so to speak, just one or two of the leaders of that church. You have the entire body who know all 6 members and their kids of this team and are giving passionately for this team and are engaged in seeing this church planted there in Senegal. So it is very much a part. And when I made reference, they light a candle every Sunday. That's because they clearly see they have 6 members of their congregation not there that day because they're somewhere else instead of being there. Scott, maybe you can make a comment on that.
Yeah, I think this pertains to the last question as well, but The other thing I saw there is that between Rock Point, 1615, and Avant, there was just continual contact, and I think someone made I think it was you, Matthew, that used the word marriage. And it's not exactly like a marriage, but there was, in essence, a long courtship. There was really getting to know each other, finding the compatibility, and a growing confidence in that partnership that generated the kind of buy-in that Dave just talked about in the congregation. Everyone understood. It wasn't one person or a leadership group or the missions committee. It was everyone. And Dave mentioned before that 1615, Matthew spent a good bit of time there, over a year. Numbers of Avant leadership spent time at the church. Church leadership spent time at Avant. We got to know each other, and we all grew in our passion for this particular piece of mission. And it just brought the church along with an enthusiasm that comes in the same way as when a church sees a huge amount of growth through new conversions or something. It just lit a spark. And now, as we move toward, a year and a half of deployment, moving toward 2 years after deployment, that spark has grown into a flame that raised even the extra money Dave talked about for the vehicles last month.
Yeah. There's a quote I often use: nothing becomes dynamic until it becomes specific. Most world missions visions are vague. The more specific your vision is, the more it will grab attention and attract commitment. And I will say that that's really, I think, one of the key factors at Rock Point Community. It's a clear vision for a people group in West Africa. It's the sending of their own people. Again, people know it, they understand it. And then I'm just reinforcing here what's already been said. But the process that we took them through, a big part of that was garnering buy-in and affirmation from the larger leadership team. I go to so many churches, and the missions vision is owned by the missions committee only, or by a few people, marginalized people in or outside the church. This is a church where the leadership together went through a process, clarified the vision, and then they invited the whole body to participate. So, yeah, just reinforcing what was said. Here's another great question. How does a local church go about training missionaries in cross-cultural ministry? This question comes from Don. How does a local church go about training missionaries in cross-cultural ministry?
Well, the local church I see it as a seedbed for growing missionaries, and that's why we love church-based teams, because within the body and within just daily life, within the city, there are so many opportunities for people to experience what it is going to be like to be a missionary. We in Lincoln actually even had a missionary prep program. So, I mean, it's kind of like, and I see the applicants that come here, and you say you want to reach Muslims of the world in some place over in the Middle East. The first question is, have you done it in your city? And the church is a wonderful place to instill the opportunities for training. There are in every city ethnic groups. In the case of this Rock Point Church, they actually have now built their short-term missions program around reaching the same people group, but in their backyard. So I see in most churches great opportunities to help, assist, or to become engaged in the training of people who want to be missionaries, but in 99% of the cases, that is totally overlooked. And I have back and forth done multiple sessions about how many signs have you seen outside the church about sign up for basketball camp, sign up for football, flag football, whatever, leadership summits. Have you ever seen a sign that said, come here and sign up for a missionary prep program? Probably not. The local church misses that opportunity by not opening and preparing a path for young people to go on in order to prepare to be a missionary.
Dave, I really like what you. Go ahead, Scott.
I'd probably add from another step in the process. Once you have that prep program, I think there are some resources out there that certain agencies will offer. Certainly we would be willing to help with something like that. But and there are other groups around, but some churches have the benefit of having experienced missionaries that are retired in their midst or in their communities, and they could draw on that. I think some combination of local resources and others that are available to bring in, if the church is going to do that training themselves, they're going to need some outside help. And honestly, it doesn't matter whether it's an agency or a training group or retired missionaries, other resources. Any group with live experience makes sense, I think. And again, it just has to fit the church's situation.
I was going to say, I really appreciate you, Dave, emphasizing that a lot of that cross-cultural ministry training, preparation, and implementation can happen in the context of a local body. Again, especially with so many internationals moving here, there's opportunities at every corner. When it comes to then the very practical preparation for the unique challenges of cross-cultural ministry in an unreached context, I want to emphasize this is where I think the agency is critical. So I think the pathways can be there at a local church level. There can be ongoing training, education, even partnership with groups like Perspectives or EWI, Encountering the World of Islam. There's a lot of organizations that will do that type of mobilization. But then when it comes for preparing the missionary and the missionary family for the unique challenges of the field, I think this is where agencies are just so critical. Let me move on to another question here. Some great questions today. This question, if the biggest challenge is agency church cohesion, this comes from Kirk, what are 2 or 3 practical steps or ideas to maintain a strong agency church relationship? So if cohesion is the problem, what are 2 or 3 practical steps that would encourage more relationship and more cohesion? Mike, why don't you, I was going to say, Mike, could you respond to that one perhaps from your perspective as a churchman?
Well, it's funny. I was saying I'm waiting to hear your answer so I can learn. So, you know, I do think that one of the things, and then I'll let you guys who probably would know more about this, but one of the things that we're looking for is for an organization that will, you know, as Matthew has said, will let us sit at the table. But not only do we want to sit at the table, we have been the table for 7 years, and so we're looking for an organization that will value us. And will, you know, respect the fact that we have done this for 7 years. We have administered, we have done furloughs for our missionaries. We've done everything that we can, and so we want to continue to play a role, a big role, and we want someone that will understand the role that we've played over the 7 years and the role that we still need to play. So I'm looking for someone that will not only allow us to be at the table, but will allow us to be a real active participant at the table in shaping and forming the direction of our mission work in North Africa.
I would concur totally with that, Mike. Just sitting down as peers in the work of the kingdom, willing to listen to one another, valuing one another, and then entering the decision-making processes jointly. No veto votes, that kind of thing. Same principles that govern any good relationship, I think, apply in this setting.
I'll be also very transparent. We do make mistakes at Avant. I don't want to leave an impression that we have this all figured out as far as the agency-church relationship. There are times where, you know, we start rolling along and we almost forget about, oh yeah, this person came to us from this given church and we're making this decision. Clear back to the very beginning of my part of the discussion, the church asking, well, how about us? Or why didn't you ask us, or whatever. So it's very, very important that the church and the agency leadership are in constant dialogue. I work hard at this, particularly on church-based teams. I send the missions pastor a snapshot of their financial picture every month of their team members and things of that nature as much as you can. But it is a process on the agency side that we have to keep working at in order to make it strong.
And guys, I think another real important aspect of this, as we consider an agency that will come alongside of us as a church, is that this agency will also value the input of the missionaries on the field. So it's kind of a triangle. You know, it's not just us sitting at a church making decisions. It's not just us at a church and an agency, both possibly in the U.S. making these decisions, but we're also putting high value on the input of the people on the field, and we feel like that's really important.
Good. Solomon said the wise listen and add to their understanding. And I think, Scott, you mentioned this listening, and that's both sides. We have forgotten the art of listening and seeking to understand. And I don't want to, you know, oversimplify this, but time spent equals relationship growth. And there's nothing better than sitting down with agency, church leaders and agency leaders coming together, breaking bread, spending time together. In fact, there's really no other way you can build a relationship. This is a great question from Dawn again. Boy, this is good stuff today. This one says, if the church is an equal partner with mission agency, then who is the missionary responsible to? In other words, who has the direct authority over the missionary?
In our case, that's an area that I work a lot with. And the churches we work with, we, as the agency, have the day-to-day responsibility for accountability. We share the sort of the macro picture. In other words, if problems arise, we're not going to act unilaterally as an agency. We're going to work with the church, and even with some of our church-based teams, as good as they are, they're not perfect, as Dave said, and we've had some interpersonal problems. We have worked together very closely, sometimes even doing joint visits with personnel from the church and the mission agency to the team on the field, and working through those issues together. But as you pointed out, Matthew, a bit ago, we do what you said. The team itself on the field is a partner. We let them determine their strategy. They work on the normal things, but when we hit the abnormalities, the anomalies, the problems that get bigger than the team itself, if something immediate needs to be done, perhaps one of our regional directors would put an interim solution in place. But always, if it's a larger problem, we work together. And in each case so far that it's occurred with us, we have seen church and agency have exactly the same position and agree on a unified approach that we've then followed through on together.
That's good. We're just about out of time here. I want to make a comment. There was a request, Dave, for the list of things that a church would need to do in order to deploy their people effectively to the field. So what we'll do is send that out to everyone. We've got your emails since you registered. We'll make sure you get a copy of that. And then, of course, the webinar will be available soon. I've got one more question I want to address, and then we'll close it up today. This is also from Jacob. Every member engaged. Strong point. What did the leadership at Rock Point do differently than the other church that seemed lost in the church mission process after the missions pastor left? Dave, I don't know if you can address that, or you want me to try and tackle that one.
Well, I mean, I think the difference was the coaching by 16-15, to be really honest, and 16-15 going in and having the total leadership or an expanded amount of the leadership involved in that process and owning that process and owning where that team was going, in contrast to, so to speak, just the missions pastor or just a small missions committee. So you're talking about, in a case like Rock Point, that senior pastor of that church knows really about as much about that strategy, what they're doing, where they're going, as a member of the missions committee. So I think that's probably how I would answer it.
That's a good point. And then maybe related to that, once this clarified vision for West Africa came out of the process, and again, I'm talking about a focused vision. I think one of the ways you build ownership in the body is by not having 100 different menu items for your missions program at your church. No one's going to own that. But they focused on a few key areas of the world, and their centerpiece was West Africa. Once that was in place, Dave, we asked the question of how do we engage every believer in this church? And a big part of what we did is we helped them craft handles. The idea is, what are simple ways that anyone and everyone at Rock Point can grab onto the missions vision? So clear vision, leadership participation in the formation of the vision, and then making that vision accessible to the larger body. Well, unfortunately, we need to wrap it up here in just a moment. I want to mention that we are going to post these questions that were not answered on the 1615 blog and hopefully continue the conversation. But I want to let you know about some upcoming events as we prepare to wrap this up. Dave, I'm going to change the slide here if I can and let you talk about the CAN conference.
Yeah, a little over 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago, we tried to make this true at Avant, and we started a Church Agency Now conference, which basically is saying the church and the agency must come together now. So every year in May, we ask all of our executive team to be here for those 2 days or day and a half, and we invite anybody, pastors, lay, who has a passion for missions to come. It's still not too late to join us for the May 14 and 15 conference coming up next month. Go to avantministries.org and you can find where you can register for this conference under church. And we would love to host you free on our campus. A great barbecue from Kansas City and great fellowship. And we always say it's a chance for us to listen to you, the pastor or the mission leader. So we would love to have you.
And let me just mention that this is the best conference food I've ever had, and that's the honest truth. So again, it's free lodging, great accommodations, great dialogue, and some really fantastic food and fellowship. Our next webinar will be July 11, 2013 at 2 p.m. Eastern. The title of the webinar is Church Planting Movements, Planting Churches That Plant Churches, and pioneers will be our subject matter presenters for that workshop. If you want more information about 1615 or Avant, I'm going to leave that screen up right there. My slides are changing on their own. I'm going to leave that screen up there. Tricia Morris is the main contact if you want more information about church missions coaching, or Dave Hansen from Avant. Let me just end here with some summary thoughts. Do local churches really need mission agencies? Well, I believe the answer is yes. As Drew pointed out, theoretically, no, but practically, yes. Churches and agencies need each other. Local churches can do it on their own, of course, but I would advise against it. Besides, with a growing number of mission agencies, like Avant, like Pioneers, and many others, who have an increasingly high view of the local church's role in world missions, why would local churches try to do missions without mission agencies? To be sure, there are still some agencies who view the local church as a little more than a source of funding. And if you're a part of a church who truly wants to join God on his global mission, you probably won't be satisfied doing missions by proxy. But everywhere I travel today, I interact with gracious and gifted mission agency leaders who deeply love the local church and believe that she is more than a resource. They believe she is a full partner. So if you are part of a church who truly wants to join God on his global mission, take the time to find the right mission agency partner so that together you might pursue what Jesus bled to obtain, worshipers from every nation, every tribe, and every tongue. A reminder, this webinar has been recorded, will be available at 1615.org and at avantministries.org within the next 2 weeks. Thank you again to our presenters for sharing with us today. I'm Matthew Ellison for 1615. Thank you for listening.